Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Welcome in the session. As you know, in the last class, we discussed the English school theory of international relations, and we were discussing that Hadley Bull argued that a society of states can exist without sharing language, culture, or religion. And a society of states at the global level, at the international level, a society of states can exist. And it is not necessary that all people in the world should have one language. It is not essential that all people of the world should have one culture. And it is not required that all people of the world should have one religion. They can follow their own religion. They can continue to practice their own culture, and they can continue to speak their own languages, but at the same time they can live as one human community. People can live as one human community. A simple need to coexist is enough. Having one religion, one culture, one language is not essential, it is not necessary. Just a simple need to coexist is enough. This gives rise to what Bull called the diplomatic culture. A diplomatic culture is required. Pakistan is involved in international diplomacy these days, and Pakistan has made huge efforts, diplomatic efforts, and to stop the America-Iran war. So look at the power of diplomacy. Diplomacy is a great power. So the countries, the nations who understand the importance of diplomacy, they benefit from it. I think in the last class we discussed Geneva. Why Geneva is famous in the world? Why Switzerland is important? It is a small country. It is not a military power, but it is powerful. It is influential. Why? Because of diplomacy. It has contributed towards international law, international regimes, international norms, international peace, global peace. So if we, the countries in the third world, in Asia, in the global south, if we understand the importance of diplomacy, we can benefit from it a lot. And not only we will benefit, the whole of globe, the whole of human community will benefit. Because when we ask the countries, ask other nations for peace, first we ourselves have to be peaceful. Can we imagine that we are waging a war, we are continuing a war, and we are asking others to not go to war? No, it cannot happen. So first we need to be peaceful ourselves, then we can ask other nations to be peaceful. First we have to stick to international law, we have to abide by the international law, we have to fulfill the requirements of international peace. Then we can ask others. Then we can engage in diplomacy for international peace, for global harmony. So this way diplomacy helps a lot. This gives rise to what Bull called the diplomatic culture. So we need to have a diplomatic culture all over the world, where all the nations speak to each other, talk to each other, rather than fighting with each other, but rather than hating one another. States do not have to be enemies of each other. They can be friends. They can live as friends. This is a web of conventions and institutions. Conventions are rules, international rules, international law. It preserves order between states, that are divided by culture and ideology. It preserves order between states which are divided by culture. They have different cultures. They are divided by ideology. States have different ideologies. Bull added that a diplomatic culture is stronger if it is rooted in an international political culture. So there has to be an international political culture. Then it will support the diplomatic culture. It works better. The diplomatic culture works better if states share the same general way of life and similar beliefs. So if people have similar beliefs, similar cultures, then it is easy. Then the diplomatic culture works better. Bull and Watson argued that in the 19th century, the European Society of States rested on an international political culture. In the 19th century, the European Society of States rested on an international political culture, but then the society expanded to include non-European regions. Then the European Society expanded to include the non-European regions. First, these regions were colonies. Colonies in Asia, colonies in Africa, colonies in America, European countries had. Later, they became post-colonial sovereign states like India and Pakistan, Indonesia. These are Bangladesh. These are post-colonial states. All this happened, the sense of being part of a common civilization declined. As this happened, the sense of being part of common civilization declined after decolonization. Even so, during decolonization, many former colonies adopted the basic rules and institutions of the European order. European order. Many former colonies adopted the basic rules and institutions. Before British came to India, were there any political parties before British India? No, there were no political parties. There were kings. There were monarchs here. Were there any parliaments in the subcontinent before British India? No, there were no parliaments. Were there any elections? No, there was no concept of elections here before British India. Similarly, in other parts of the world, when European powers went back and these colonies were decolonized, they adopted several European institutions. So now we have political parties. So there were political parties in Great Britain. So they brought the concept here. Indian National Congress was the first political party. Then there were more political parties like Muslim League, then the Unionist Party, and many others. Similarly, now we have parliaments, now we conduct elections, and many other things. Even so, during decolonization, many former colonies adopted the basic rules and institutions of the European order. For example, they adopted the idea of sovereign equality. Sovereign equality and the principle of non-intervention. What is the principle of non-intervention? What is this principle of the idea of sovereign equality? Sovereign equality means that all countries are sovereign and their sovereignty is equal. All countries are sovereign and their sovereignty, their independence is equal. And the principle of non-intervention, that one state has no right to interfere in the internal matters of other states. It is called the principle of non-intervention. No state has the right and no state should interfere in the internal matters of other states. They did this partly to protect themselves legally from European interference. This gave us the first universal society of formally equal sovereign states. Now, in the world, you have an international society which comprises mostly equal sovereign states. Today, there is no common political culture underpinning international society. So, do you think there is one international culture? No. There are different cultures. Different countries, different states, different regions have their own different cultures. There is only a very thin agreement on common values like sovereign equality. So there is some agreement among states on sovereign equality, some agreement. It is not completely followed. It is not completely followed, but there is some understanding. States understand that other states has equal sovereignty. And even that is often contested. But this might change. It can change. Bull thought that elites across the world might one day identify with an emerging cosmopolitan culture of modernity. So one day, maybe one cosmopolitan culture, one big culture evolves, and all the people in the world, they have common culture, one culture. It is possible. It may change that there are different cultures in the world. Okay, for example, the social media, I think it is helping in that direction. All the young people, they use, almost all young people use social media, and their habits, their likes and dislikes are somehow converging in one direction. Similarly, another example is McDonald's and KFC. It is becoming popular in more and more countries, more and more cities. So all over the world, people, particularly young people, they like McDonald's, KFC, and soft drinks. Although these are bad things, I don't like them. They are unhealthy, but they are part of our culture, and they are part of a global culture which is emerging slowly, gradually. But again, the English school philosophers, theorists say it is not essential to have one global culture, but it might emerge. Bull said that all societies, whether domestic or international, have arrangements for protecting three primary goals. All societies, whether domestic or international, have arrangements for protecting three primary goals. What are the three primary goals? First, number one, placing restraints on violence. Placing restraints on violence. War is also violence. War is also violence. So placing restraints to make efforts to making efforts that there is less and less war, or there is no war. Second, upholding property rights, that citizens have right to hold property. Third, ensuring that contracts and agreements are kept. Agreements should be respected. Contracts are also agreements. So contracts should be respected, they should be honored, they should be kept, they should not be violated. The fact that these primary goals are common to both domestic and international society explains why Bull rejected the domestic analogy. Domestic systems are different than the international system. We have already studied. Domestic systems, national systems have hierarchies. They have an order. But in international systems, there is no hierarchy. It is anarchic. The domestic analogy is the idea that a peaceful international order can only come from a world government. So in order to have stability and order at the national level, we have governments. And if we take this analogy to the global level, it requires a world government. So the English school does not take the domestic analogy to the international. English school writers break with realism here. They believe states can enjoy the benefits of society without giving up their powers to a higher authority. Bull's approach was that states are usually committed to limiting the use of force. States are usually committed to limiting the use of force. They are also committed to respecting property and preserving their trust in their relations with each other. These shared interests are the ultimate foundation of international society. These shared interests are the ultimate foundation of international society. They do not require a common culture or shared way of life. As members of that society, sovereign nation states have similar commitments to protect these primary goals. But the interstate order is different because it is anarchical. Interstate order, interstate, between and among the states, is different because it is anarchical. There is anarchy. There is no central government at the global level. Societies of states exist because most political communities want to restrain the use of force. Most political communities, most countries, they want to restrain the use of force. They do not want war. Most countries do not like war. They want to bring civility to their external relations, civility, human norms, okay, goodness. They want to bring goodness to their external relations. This helps them protect their primary goals. So English school writers argue that international society can be multinational. International society can be multinational. There can be different nations in the international society. It can include states with radically different cultures and philosophies of government. In the international society, there can be different cultures, there can be different philosophies, there can be different political philosophies, different social philosophies, there can be democratic societies, there can be socialist societies, there can be religious societies, there can be atheist societies at the same time in different parts of the world, but at the same time there can be an international society in which different societies, people, they tolerate each other, they coexist, they live in peace and harmony, so they don't attack one another. One of the main jobs of diplomacy is to promote mutual understanding. Mutual understanding means people respect each other's rights. They coexist. They live and they let live others. So if this understanding prevails all over the world, I think there will be wars. There will be no more wars. they will not have to fight against each other. If a good understanding is developed among different communities in the world, different nations, different states in the world, it helps find common ground between very different cultures. These cultures often fail to understand each other's intentions. These cultures often fail to understand each other's intentions. A crucial issue here is how the inside affects the outside. How the inside of states affects the outside of states. In other words, how the domestic system affects the international system. How do domestic beliefs contribute to the development of international order? White. White wrote an essay on international legitimacy. He showed that the principles of international society changed as the dynastic system was replaced by the idea that sovereignty resides in the people or the nation. So when there were dynasties, there were kings, there were monarchs, and monarchs believed and they made people believe that they are superior and they are sovereign and people are their subjects. But now the idea of sovereign nations, it has changed that political belief. Now in democratic countries, it is believed that people are sovereign. Kings are not sovereign. People, nation is sovereign. He added that these principles of legitimacy mark the region of approximation between international and domestic politics. Approximation. Now, this idea of sovereignty of the people, it is helping communities all over the world to come closer. Come closer. When there were kings and kings were understood as considered as sovereign, people were not sovereign, it meant that the kings, they wanted to stay separate as long as possible. People living under those kings, they could not come one nation because it would cause the elimination of sovereignty of the one king, some kings. So the kings didn't want to lose sovereignty. But if people in different countries who are sovereign, they form one global community, they still will be sovereign. They still will be sovereign. People are sovereign whether they hate other nations or not, whether they go to war against others or not, they will remain sovereign. And if they live in harmony with other countries and other nations, they still will be sovereign. So this idea of legitimacy, it is helping to have an international society. They are principles that are proclaimed within most states, as well as in the relations between them. Because of this, it is not surprising that some regimes have tried to force others to follow their vision of the good society. Examples include the religious wars of the 17th century, the French Revolutionary Wars, and Bolshevik efforts to export socialism. So these were the efforts to bring people closer to their own version of international society. More recently, Western states have tried to export liberal democracy through peace building and state building operations. English school thinkers are not convinced by those who think all states must share the same political ideology. So some thinkers argue that all states must share the same political ideology. All people in the world should have one political ideology. English school thinkers, they did not agree with this idea. They advise against trying to impose one set of values on others. The real challenge is how to build international society in the middle of cultural diversity. Cultures are diverse, cultures are not same. This is the challenge that in the face of diverse cultures, how can we build an international society? But they recognize that hegemonic efforts have happened many times in history. Hegemonic efforts. Hegemonic efforts, creating one global society, one world society through force. That is hegemonic. These efforts show there are deep struggles over the nature of international society, struggles over who is its rightful members are, what is organizing principle, what its organizing principles should be, and where it is going. So people do not agree on these things, these points. This emphasis makes the English school a natural ally of constructivist analysis. I think in the upcoming classes, we will also study constructivism. It is another theory of international relations. So this point is common, close with the constructivism theory, constructivist theory. Constructivists also study principles of legitimacy and global norms. But the English school has long investigated the normative and institutional factors that give international society its distinctive logic and identity. Investigation here means research. Investigated, researched. The English school has long investigated the normative and institutional factors that give international society its distinctive logic and identity. Normative factors, which belong to norms and values. What should be, what should not be, how the world should be, how the world should not be. These things are normative. They are not scientific. They are based on our values. What do we like and what do we not like? The fact that world society is increasingly multicultural and multi-religious only shows how valuable this approach is. It helps us understand the complex interplay between domestic ideologies, social forces, and the changing shape of international society. So the English school it helps us understand the complex interplay between domestic ideologies, social factors, and the changing shape of international society. So, with this, our today's discussion, my presentation comes to an end, and now we can have question answer session.